Hi, I'm Nadine, and this is the story of how my father's final words rewrote everything my sister thought she controlled. Right there, in a room full of witnesses, and silence sharpened by years of being overlooked. They didn't save me a seat. Serena barely glanced up when I walked in, and yet somehow every eye turned like I didn't belong. But what stayed with me wasn't the cold chair or the stares. It was the way truth, written in my father's own hand, cut through it all like sunlight through a dusty window. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. I hadn't stepped onto the porch in over a decade, but the wood still creaked like it remembered me. The scent in the air hadn't changed. Pecan leaves, chimney smoke, and something else. Something faintly bitter, like unfinished conversations, and the dust of memories too heavy to carry. I parked the car just beyond the fence, half hoping it would all disappear in the rearview mirror. But the house stood still, slouched under October's golden hush, every shutter sagging just a bit more than I remembered. Easley Hollow hadn't changed much. A new banner for the upcoming Harvest Festival flapped lazily outside the old church, and Miss Penelope's pie truck still sat near the corner, its mint green paint now chipped with age. Serena hadn't even called, just a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet. Regarding Marvin Collins' estate. That was it. No, dear Nadine. No, I'm sorry. Just like Serena, neat, efficient, and colder than the wind threading through the dying trees. As I stepped inside, the house sighed. Dust motes floated like quiet ghosts in the late afternoon light. The smell of cedar and mothballs welcomed me like reluctant relatives. I touched the hallway table where Dad used to leave his keys and mail. My fingers lingered on the edge. I had painted that trim myself once, back when we still thought time could be repaired with a fresh coat. Memories came in flashes. Me spooning soup to Dad on that sagging couch, patching the roof with tar and desperation. Him asking for Serena, even when I was the one who stayed. The funeral had been extravagant. Too many roses, a string quartet, people I barely recognized nodding solemnly. I stood in the back, unwelcome, unacknowledged. When I raised my hand to speak, Serena's eyes found mine, and didn't flinch, but the pastor moved on anyway. I was unpacking when I heard the knock. A soft shuffle first, then 3 taps. I opened the door to see Mrs. Joanne on the stoop, holding a warm dish wrapped in foil. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said, eyes searching mine, kind but cautious. "I wasn't either," I answered, stepping aside. She handed me the cinnamon apple pie with a small smile. "Still like it warm?" "I do." She nodded, then looked past me into the house, eyes flicking over old curtains and fading wallpaper. "Well," she murmured, "it's good someone's back in it." As I closed the door, another knock came, harder this time. I opened it again to find Serena, arms crossed, lips curled just so. "There's a hearing for Dad's estate, tomorrow morning," she said, cool as always. "You could have told me sooner." "I figured the letter was enough." Her eyes ran over my sweater, Dad's old brown one. A flicker of something, then gone. She handed me a sleek invitation, embossed and far too formal. "Don't be late," she said. "This one's too important to miss." And she smiled like she already knew the ending. There wasn't a seat with my name on it, but there were plenty of stairs. I stepped into the grand room of Easley Hollow's town hall, and time felt like it folded in on itself. The long table stretched beneath rust-colored garlands and 2 perfect arrangements of chrysanthemums. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting slanted lines across polished wood and worn faces. I scanned the room. Everyone was already seated. Everyone except me. For a second, I thought maybe I was early. But no, I was just unaccounted for. I caught the eyes of 3 cousins, names I could barely recall, before they quickly turned away, pretending not to recognize me. That old, familiar itch crept up my spine. Forgotten again, like at every family gathering when I was little. There was always 1 seat short, 1 name missing on the party favors. Mine. "Here, dear," came a gentle voice. Mrs. Joanne stood and tugged a spare chair from the wall, sliding it beside her with a clatter that echoed too loud. "You'll sit next to me." I gave her a grateful nod and lowered myself into the rickety thing. The leg wobbled immediately. Fitting. "Well, well." Serena's voice sliced through the room, as smooth and cold as marble. "Wasn't sure if she'd show. She usually skips the big stuff." A few chuckles rippled down the table, but they died quickly under the weight of her stare. Mr. Fernley, the estate lawyer, cleared his throat and shuffled papers with slow, deliberate hands. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice cracked slightly, like the old microphone in the church basement. "Before we begin with the formal reading, there is a private item." He reached into his leather briefcase and retrieved a small envelope. Yellowed, edges soft from handling. "Miss Collins," he said, offering it to me. I took it, hands trembling. My name was written in Dad's script, still steady, still his. A short note printed in bold beneath. To be opened in the presence of Mr. Fernley only. The room shifted. People leaned in, curious. I felt their eyes digging into me like pins. I hesitated. The paper felt too thin for what it might carry. But Dad had left it, for me. My voice caught. I swallowed and tried again. "Would you mind reading it out loud?" I asked, and the room fell quiet like a storm was coming. My father's handwriting was uneven, but the truth cut sharp and clean. Mr. Fernley adjusted his glasses and unfolded the letter with deliberate care, as though the paper itself carried more weight than his legal documents ever could. Morning light spilled through the high windows, glinting off the glass pitcher at the center of the table. I held my breath. "To my daughters," he began, his voice quiet but sure. "I may no longer be able to speak, but I hope my words on this page speak clearly enough." A hush settled deeper into the room. Serena crossed her arms. Her foot tapped against the polished floor. "I know I won't get to see another Thanksgiving," Fernley continued reading, "and that's all right. I've had a good run, but there's something I need to say." The letter described a man aware of the time he had left and the people who chose to spend that time with him. "Serena," it read, "you have always been bright and determined. But in these final years, I felt more like a burden to you than a father. I don't fault you for it, but I can't ignore it either." The air thickened. Serena's lips tightened. "Nadine," the letter continued, "you came home with nothing but a beat-up suitcase and soup ingredients. You never asked for anything, not once. You read to me. You replaced the shingles on the shed without being asked. You never posted a thing, never made a speech, never complained." I stared at the old rug beneath my chair, trying not to feel every eye in the room. Serena stood abruptly. "She manipulated him when he was weak." Her voice cracked. Mr. Fernley cleared his throat and reached for a small manila envelope. Per Mr. Collins' instructions, I was to document his final wishes, just in case. These include a notarized letter and a video statement. He didn't need to say more. The implication landed like a gavel. And then, the line that changed everything. "Nadine never asked for a thing, which is why I gave her everything." Serena knocked over her water glass. the sharp clink of glass on wood startling everyone. Her voice trembled as she pointed at me. She tricked him. She had to. My father looked at me in his last days and gave me his property, but that is making my sister disagree. As a family, do we need to be so competitive? If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now, let's get to the next development of this story. I never meant to keep records, but some truths deserve a witness. The rain had started to fall, soft and steady against the tall windows of the conference room. It made everything outside look washed and blurred, like the town itself was reluctant to watch what was unfolding inside. Serena sat across from me at the long oak table, arms crossed so tight I could see her knuckles pale. Mr. Fernley stood at the head of the room, calm as ever, but his eyes flicked to me with a silent question. "How? I want this recorded," she snapped. "If she thinks she can twist our father's final days into some saint act, I'm not letting it slide." Fernley nodded and pressed a small button on his phone. "For the record, this is a private legal consultation regarding objections filed against Mr. Marvin Collins' will, initiated by Serena Collins." She leaned forward. "She manipulated him when he was frail. That's undue influence. This whole thing is—" "I have footage," I said quietly. That stopped her cold. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a small USB drive and slid it across the table. "Dad asked Mr. Fernley to record something a few weeks before he passed. You were in New Orleans with your realtor at the time." Serena's face twitched, but she didn't deny it. Fernley inserted the drive into his laptop, and the room went still except for the whir of the fan. On the screen, my father appeared. Frail, yes, but his voice was clear and steady. "I know my daughters will be surprised," he said, "but I want it on record. Nadine is the only one who came home without a price tag." Next to me, Mr. Ridley shifted in his seat. "I saw Serena showing the place to a broker," he said, voice low. "Your daddy hadn't even left his bedroom yet." The air thickened. I reached into my bag again, this time pulling out a soft, worn envelope. "This," I said, unfolding it slowly. "He gave me 10 years ago, after I paid Miss Lorna's heating bill behind her back. He said, 'You remind me of your mother, quiet but always paying attention.'" Serena's breath hitched. "You don't get to call me selfish," I said, placing the old envelope on the table. "Not when you spent years taking what was never yours." The air smelled like wet cedar and relief. Harriet's diner buzzed with a hum I hadn't felt in years. Soft conversation, clinking cups, and the low crackle of a jazz tune playing on the radio. The same tune my father used to play while he washed dishes, a late-night ritual that once filled the house with calm. I sipped from a chipped mug, nodding at the barista who greeted me with a warmth I didn't expect. Across the room, heads tilted in my direction, some hesitant, some sheepish. Then a woman I barely remembered, Mrs. Kellen, approached with her coat still damp from the morning mist. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "We didn't know. We believed Serena. I'm sorry for not asking more questions." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." The seat across from me slid back, and Mr. Harold, my father's old fishing buddy, lowered himself in with a groan. "Your daddy," he said, stirring his tea, "once turned down an offer to sell that house to some big-shot developer. Told me a man's home should always be waiting for his daughter to come back. He meant you." I looked down, trying to keep my face steady. "He never told me that." He didn't have to. Later that afternoon, I found myself walking beside Mrs. Joanne at the town's little flea market, the one that popped up every fall behind the library. The air was crisp, vendors calling out over the scent of kettle corn and roasted peanuts. She guided me to a modest booth filled with knitted scarves and mittens. "This one," she said, holding up a pale blue scarf, "was your mother's. She left it at my house once. I think it belongs with you now." The yarn was softer than I remembered. I wrapped it gently around my neck and whispered, "Thank you." As we reached the center lawn, a small crowd gathered by the gazebo. A group of teenagers had set up speakers and folding chairs, and above them, a carved wooden sign hung proudly, "Marvin's Porch Sessions." Beneath it, etched in careful cursive, "To the daughter who stayed. Thank you." The tears came without warning. Later that evening, as I washed my hands at the public fountain outside Harriet's, I felt the water run cold over my skin, like washing off old stories. My phone buzzed. It was Serena. "One day you'll regret this." I stared at the message for a moment, and then I deleted it. I didn't need the house to prove anything, but it remembered who I was. The light on that Sunday morning filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting faint patterns on the worn wood floors. I had cracked the windows just a little, letting the smell of sun-warmed leaves and old cedar drift in. It was quiet, just the kind of quiet my father loved, where every creak and sigh of the house spoke like an old friend. The sweater I had worn that first day, the one that used to be his, was clean now, hanging neatly on the wall hook by the door. I didn't plan on wearing it again. It had found its place. I spent the morning dusting the old frames and rehanging the photograph of my parents on the mantel, the one where Mom's laugh looked like it might burst free from the glass. I hadn't cried when I placed it there, just breathed easier. Around 10, Mrs. Joanne knocked. "I brought you something," she said, lifting a basket filled with honey biscuits and a tiny potted herb. "It's rosemary, for remembrance." She followed me out back, where two teenagers, Danny and his sister Elise, were hammering up planks to fix the sagging deck. They had volunteered, eager and clumsy, but full of heart. "It's coming along," Danny grinned. "We're calling it Marvin's Back Porch." Near the garage, a young couple waved. They'd asked earlier if they could rent the space to teach weekend guitar lessons. I said yes before they finished their sentence. Later, I walked Mrs. Joanne to the old garden. The persimmon tree, neglected for years, still stood strong. A few golden orange fruits clung stubbornly to the branches. "We planted that when your mother was pregnant with you," she said, smiling. Inside, on the kitchen table, someone had left a sealed envelope. No name, just my address in shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly. "I watched it happen," it read. "I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry." No signature, just those words, and I believed every one of them. That afternoon, neighbors wandered in with chairs, books, and photo frames. Someone brought a rusted tea kettle, just like the one Marvin used to boil on Sundays. As the sun slipped low, I stood at the doorway. A beam of golden light fell across the shoulder of that old sweater, and I thought, he built it for me. I just had to come home. Some homes don't need fixing. They just need someone to believe in them again. In the stillness of that old porch, surrounded by chipped paint and soft morning light, I found something steadier than inheritance. A place where quiet goodness had always lived. Kindness, even when unnoticed, leaves its own kind of legacy, one that doesn't fade with time or weather. Like a porch light left on for someone long gone, it waits, unwavering, for us to return. If this story found its way to your heart, maybe it's time to check who's waiting on your front steps, too. A small kindness today may echo louder than you think tomorrow.